Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Mario Munoz, who is the President of Mölnlycke, Japan. Mario, welcome.
Greg, thank you very much.
So,
thank you for
Mario,
having me.
how is it that you're running this healthcare operation in Japan? What's the backstory for you?
Thank you for the question. It's actually a very exciting situation and a part of a long-term project for me. A little bit of the backstory. I came to Japan almost 10 years ago, and I had a very clear understanding of what the opportunity for Japan was within the medical device world. Japan is the second largest medical device market in the world.
Right.
The market is basically, the healthcare market is basically bigger than the US in terms of number of hospitals. They have twice
than the US?
Twice the number of hospitals in Japan than the US.
No idea. Wow, that's intriguing.
And that is basically because of the structure of the national health system that Japan has made. So when I came to Japan, I wanted to break through into the Japanese leadership world, bringing a different flavor and a different sense to what the business world was doing in Japan. I had lived in Japan earlier in my life.
This is when?
I lived in Japan for the first time back from 1979 to 1982.
Okay. We are contemporaries because that was me too. I was 79 to 83. And then I went back to Australia and came back again later.
Oh, similar.
So we're similar. We must have bumped into each other somewhere not knowing it.
Absolutely, probably did. So at that time, I have to say, I was impressed with Japan, with the efficiency, with the amount of efficient and positivity that I saw everywhere. But I also noticed some things that stuck in my mind, which eventually brought me back. And it was the difficulty to understand at that time the outside influence from Japan. Japan became, during the boom economy, after the war, it became an insulated type of economy. And that allowed it to grow a lot. On the business side, in the business world, basically, the focus was a lot on making things work for Japan. But technology and medical technology has a birthplace not only in Japan, but outside of Japan. So in order for that technology, that influence to be able to break through, changes need to happen in the mindset at all levels, from the top to the manager level to the grassroots. And that is something that stuck with me throughout my career.
So in that 79 to 82 period, were you going to school here or were you studying here?
Yes, I was studying here at that time, from that 79 to 82 period.
Right. And what level were we at university by this time? Where are we?
I was in middle school going to high school.
Okay.
At that time.
And this is what, ASAJ or one of those big international schools?
St. Mary's International.
My son's a alumnus of St. Mary's too.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So St. Mary's.
So you were learning Japanese
yes.
at that time then?
At that time, I was learning Japanese. I was fully immersed in Japanese. And that was a fortunate encounter with the language because it helped me to pick that, the language part, but also to discover that I have an affinity to languages, which I later gathered through my life.
Yeah, well, actually, 79, learning Japanese, you would have been one of the very few people who were foreigners doing that. There weren't a lot of foreigners floating around on the street in 79, as I remember, and you probably remember the same thing.
Exactly.
So that was good timing for you.
Yes. Yes.
So please, keep going.
It was a good timing, and I must say it was intense in the sense that a lot of learning was happening, but I assimilated the culture at an early age. And then eventually I continued, after we moved from Japan to the next post, which was France, I continued studying Japanese on my own.
Oh, well done.
So I never really got detached fully from Japan. And I continued studying on my own. I found several Japanese teachers along my life who definitely helped to keep it current, to keep it steady. And then eventually, throughout my career, I began in the U.S., working in the U.S. market. After which, I started my MBA work, my postgraduate work at Thunderbird University. And I always had a proclivity to an international career, to building an international career.
Right.
And that's why I did the MBA at Thunderbird.
Well, I'm not sure about Thunderbird. Is that particularly aimed for people who are having international business careers? Is that particularly focused on that?
Yes. At the time, I believe it was since 1946, Thunderbird, American Graduate Studies School in Phoenix, Arizona, Glendale, Arizona, was focused on international business.
Right. So that would have been fairly unique, I guess, amongst American colleges.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Great.
So at the time, it seemed as the best option for someone who wanted to gear his or her career towards an international profile, which in turn, which turned out to be a very positive experience because at that time I was working with Hewlett-Packard, and Hewlett-Packard basically allowed me to continue through my MBA, and after finishing the MBA, I moved with the company to Germany.
So were you with HP before the MBA?
I was with HP before the MBA and throughout the MBA.
Did they pay for it?
Yes.
Nice.
Yes, they actually did.
Nice. Okay, great.
And actually, they allowed me to do telecommuting, so I was actually living in Glendale and working at the same time, doing telecommuting to my office in Palo Alto.
Pioneer of remote working.
It was very hard. The modems were phone modems, and it was difficult. The connection was not steady, but
so good.
It worked.
And interesting. Okay, so you go to Germany and with HP. So at what point do you come back to Japan?
After being in Germany, I moved to Brazil with HP as well, because of the languages.
Although you mentioned that your parent, was it your father was Spanish and mother was Italian?
Correct.
And so no Portuguese.
No Portuguese
there at all. And Spanish and Portuguese are not exactly the same, are they?
No Portuguese, but Spanish and Portuguese have a common, actually Italian as well, they have a common root, which is Latin.
All right.
And Portuguese actually developed from the Galician dialect, which is very similar to Spanish, but with a different cadence.
Right.
So I began studying Portuguese pretty much right after my university years, because I wanted to focus on international markets. At the time, Brazil was growing a lot, and what better idea to understand the market than to really understand the language?
Yeah.
So then after Germany, I moved to Brazil with HP for a year and a half, and then I came back to the US. Then a pivotal moment in time happened, which was the dot-com crisis.
Right. It was around 2000.
Exactly. So when that happened, HP had recently acquired Compaq.
Okay.
And it was a controversial acquisition impacted by or magnified by the dot-com crisis. And that prompted me to look for a different type of challenge where I could apply what I understood about technology at the time, but more focused into healthcare.
So why healthcare? I mean, HP is not necessarily a healthcare company, so you could have taken that tech background into any particular field, I imagine. Why healthcare?
That's a very good question. When I was working in HP, I was at the Imaging Products Group division.
Okay.
And the imaging products by HP
Yep.
are used in the hospitals
Right.
extensively.
So you have that. So it was in the health
So
area
I was
within HP.
Yes, within the HP world, I was close to the healthcare area
Right.
in terms of imaging,
Right.
digital imaging.
Right.
For example, MRIs, for X-rays. The technology was starting to change and enable higher resolution imaging. So I was a little bit in touch with healthcare, but what really pushed me into healthcare was the ambition to help someone through what I do.
Okay. Now, this sounds terrific, and you have a lot of companies have all this sort of propaganda about, people first and, health first and blah, blah, blah. But where was this coming from inside you? Because, you go through an American university, I imagine it's fairly, focused on the bottom line and turn you out as an MBA who's going to really boost the shareholder value of the company. So where does this altruistic element come from within yourself?
I'll share with you something personal.
Okay.
I had been doing rock climbing during my university years.
Okay.
And during that time, as I learned rock climbing, I actually took a paramedic course because when you practice rock climbing, it's very easy to break a bone.
Right.
And normally when you're out in the mountains, you don't have access to emergency services. So you have to depend on each other. And after taking the paramedic course, I actually was able to help one of my one of my mates, my climbing mates. He fell and broke his tibia.
Oh.
And I was able to improvise and help him in the meantime that the emergency services came. It was an open fracture, but we were able to stabilize it. That knowledge, I could not have helped him, and maybe he would have bled profusely if I was not able to do that. So that's something that stuck with me always.
Something you realized this stuff works and has an actual value in people's livelihoods, yeah?
Exactly.
Right.
And then I continued with a second course, resuscitation. So I was always interested in what we can do in the everyday life. If you see an emergency happening around you, what can you do? And that kind of brought me into that latent want to see, okay, what can I do for someone? But how can I do it from the business side? How can I bring those two things together? And at that time, what made more sense for me was taking a full step into healthcare. At the time, the healthcare world was an R&D driven industry, which was in an infant stage for business development. Because it was basically the users, the surgeons, and the doctors, the HCPs, who were driving the innovation needs.
Right.
But many times, the user does not really know what they need, and that's where engineering or R&D and the market come together. So how do we link the two in order to develop the best for the market at the feature and the price points that the market is willing and able to support?
Right, right. And so you're in HP, you're in that sort of imaging area. How do you branch out of that into health proper? Where did you go?
My first step into healthcare was orthopedics.
Okay.
Orthopedic surgery.
Right.
For me, I told you about the situation with the tibia. Open cut. I was familiar with the musculoskeletal system.
Right.
I was familiar with some of the anatomical challenges that we as humans have throughout our lifetime. And orthopedic surgery gave me the opportunity to dive directly into trauma and joint replacements.
Right, right.
And that's how I came into healthcare.
Right, right. And which company did you join?
Stryker.
Stryker, wow.
Stryker Corporation.
Ex-client of ours here in Japan. We did training for Stryker in the past, I have to say.
Oh, you did?
I hope we get to do it again, but yes, they're a client of ours. As is HP too. There's another client of ours as well. So this is Stryker in America.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then how do you get back to Japan in the health area? How do you pivot out? Because you could have stayed in the States, right? I mean, there's a massive population. 40-odd% of Americans are obese. Bound to be putting a lot of strain on the skeletal, features, hips particularly, knees particularly, ankles particularly. You have a tremendous, professional sporting aspect to American culture too, with people just getting really beaten up in their sports and needing hip replacements and as they get older after they've stopped competing. So there's a huge market there. I mean, it's a massive market. So why would you need to go anywhere else than stay in America with Stryker? So how do you take that Japan interest and get that back on the journey here to get back to here?
It's actually funny you mentioned that, because it was actually a journey. After doing the U.S. market for a long time, an exciting market, by the way, always growing, incessant innovation, I never lost the sight of developing an international career. And I knew at the time that eventually where I could really make a difference is in Japan or in Asia. At the time, the pathway back to Japan was not exactly a straight line. So in order to get back to Japan, I went to Switzerland first.
An obvious detour.
An obvious detour. So I spent some time in Zurich working with Zimmer.
Right.
And then I came back to the US, but my boss in Switzerland moved to Singapore.
Oh.
And that was when the emerging markets were starting to buzz. There was a lot of growth on emerging markets. And my ex-boss at that time, we had a conversation, and she said to me, well, sometime in the future, if something arises in Asia, would you be interested? I said, of course I would be. And we tabled that for several years. Eventually, the opportunity came, and it was actually an interesting anecdote that I want to share with you. It was going to be my birthday, and I received a WhatsApp message. And the WhatsApp message was basically from my ex-boss and saying, hey, happy birthday. Are you still enjoying the US, or are you up for some sushi?
Wow, happy birthday, report to Tokyo.
We had a lunch, needless to say, we had a lunch a few days later in Singapore. I met the Japan president, who eventually became my mentor.
So is this
in Japan.
Is this Zimmer or is this Stryker?
Zimmer.
No, we're now with Zimmer. So
Yes.
you left Stryker, joined Zimmer, and now we're talking about Zimmer Japan.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So basically, I went to Zimmer after several years with Stryker, and then with Zimmer I had the opportunity to move to Switzerland, and then eventually Zimmer Japan.
Well, Zimmer's done an amazing job. I mean, Zimmer frames as a walking aid is
Yes.
like Xerox. It's like become one of those terms that just, boom, the two things go together. I'm sure there are lots of other people making frames, but the Zimmer frame has got that sort of gold standard of branding recognition, hasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the brand recognition and the stability,
Right.
the reliability.
Have they been in Japan a long time, Zimmer?
Yes.
They have, okay.
Yes.
Nice.
Zimmer has been in Japan. Zimmer has the largest market share in Japan.
Do they? Wow. Okay.
Yes. And after the Biomet acquisition, it actually became even bigger, so around 48% plus. But Zimmer has been in Japan, one of the first orthopedic companies to be here, because many Japanese surgeons are actually designers,
Right.
implant designers.
Okay.
So probably going on more than 40 years here in Japan.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, why are orthopedic surgeons in Japan implement designers and orthopedic surgeons outside of Japan not necessarily implement designers? Well, what's happening here that Japan has that functionality?
That's a good question. Japanese surgeons tend to be a little bit of tinkerers.
Are they? Okay.
They actually, I'll give you an example. They actually, in the surgeon population, they're the ones that actually tend to modify their instruments.
Themselves?
more, yes, themselves, more than other surgeons.
Interesting.
So they tinker a lot in order to preserve the natural soft tissue of the body.
Right.
So they will actually modify retractors in order to avoid tissue damage when actually pulling back on the bone.
Right.
And that leads also for them to design due to the Japanese morphology, which is actually smaller morphology than Western morphology. They are actually driven by the need in order. Sometimes the smallest stent or the smallest knee implant is not small enough for the Japanese knee.
Yeah, I was going to say they're very slim build,
and smaller bones.
Don't have the size. So yes, I can imagine that. Right. So no wonder they're tinkering.
Yes.
Probably cutting bits off. So did you become the head of Zimmer here as a CEO, or did they put you in at some position just below CEO? What was the?
I was below the CEO.
So what were you, like vice president or division head or something?
The division head.
Right. Okay.
For hips and knees.
Hips and knees. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's my future. Hips and knees. I'm looking forward to that.
Today, the hips and knees are they've actually reached the level, the implants have reached the level that will really benefit the patient for the lifetime of the patient.
Right.
That's because
So one surgery.
One surgery.
Not multiple surgeries.
No.
Yeah.
One surgery, the implant will outlive the patient.
Wow. Okay.
The technology is now at that moment.
Good.
Yes.
So you come in as division head, and how long do they hold you in that position before they elevate you to run the company?
3 years.
3 years. So
3 years.
This is your first occasion to be running a team in Japan as the leader. You've been here at St. Mary's, and then you've studied Japanese, and you have that interest. But this is you've had a long career managing teams outside of Japan, so you've got lots of managerial experience. You've got an MBA. Now, it's Honban, it's like for real. Okay, you're the division head. Here's the division. Run it. So what were some of the challenges you found to run a team of Japanese in that division? What was different?
I think one of the main differences that I found from the get-go is the decision-making process.
Right. Being, I'm going to say, slower.
Exactly. So not just slower, but also more difficult to get to the point. A lot of discussion and many points of view, but difficult to get to the point quickly. Those are the two things that I think were the sticking points that I found.
So how did you navigate that? Because I'm sure coming out of a Western business environment, people really focus on quick decision making, take accountability, take responsibility for your decision, and that's the basis of your career. So when you get here, I'm sure you've got lots of internal pressure to have results, and the company sent you over here to get results, and they're grooming you to be president. So probably you're thinking, I better get some results here, speed. You're probably thinking speed. But no, the decision-making is a little bit more oblique maybe, a little bit less clear, a little bit more time-consuming. So how did you navigate that?
From the very beginning, I decided that my way to connect with the Japanese teams was to be open with them.
How many in that division at that time?
At that time, it was 72 people.
That's a lot of Japanese
72 people
managing when you don't have experience of managing Japan.
Yes.
So well done. So you tell us more about your approach.
So within that large area, that large division, that included the sales reps and the marketing team.
Okay.
The district managers, the region managers. And even though I had the direct communication with the managers, I decided to get closer to the grassroots.
Why?
Going to the market.
Why?
Why? Because what I saw is that if you venture out from that sphere or cloud and get closer to the sales rep, not only do you learn what's really happening, what the pain points are, but there is a connection and a motivational process that happens. Because the sales rep feels that their word is important, that their worries and concerns are important. And what I also identified is that that was not normally done. So the bucho level was not exactly interacting frequently with the sales rep level or with the product manager level.
So I can imagine you got the division head level here, and then you got kacho, section head levels down below.
Yes.
And then, junior kacho level type of thing. So by going direct down to the salespeople, did you have a problem with your section heads feeling a bit uncomfortable? Okay, why is the new guy going around me to my people and talking directly to them? He should be talking to me. That's why I'm the kacho here, I'm the section head. Did you have that type of issue, or how did that come up? How did it come up? How did you deal with that?
Very good question. At the beginning, I did feel a little bit of resistance from the kacho level. But what I did is I aligned the sales director, the NSD, the National Sales Director, and the kachos with a vision.
Right.
And I explained to them, we need to figure out where we are strong. We need to figure out and find out why we are losing market share, even though it was a trickle of loss, not a lot. But I wanted to understand why we had some surgeons that were moving away from us to the competitors.
So is this a case of market is expanding and you are not expanding big enough and fast enough with the growth of the market? Or is it a case of the market is fairly stable and your market share is actually shrinking?
The market was expanding a bit, and we were not growing faster than the market.
Right.
We were
so
actually
left behind.
We were getting left behind, still with the largest market share, but there was a leak of small accounts.
A worrying trend, I'm sure, when you see that. Right?
Exactly, because at the end of the fiscal year, the growth was a low one digit.
Oh, okay.
And that low one digit mainly came from maybe 2-3 university hospitals, but that was not really organic market share increase. So what I did is basically, I set out to understand what was happening. Previously, what happened, what was normally done is when an account was lost, it was lost, and they didn't reach out to see what happened. And I decided.
And why is that? I mean, these are
the hierarchy.
Salespeople.
Yes.
I don't know whether they paid a commission or they were just on salary and bonus. I don't know how they're remunerated, but normally, if that happened, you'd want to know why. Or is it a case of that's shameful to lose that account and embarrassing? So the best way to avoid shame and embarrassment is to just as if it never happened, and we just keep moving forward somewhere else. Is that where are we here, and why aren't they being more proactive to discover that cause?
It is exactly what you mentioned. So when an account is lost, it's shameful, and there is a compound effect that is generated if there's a lot of questions going into that. So it's usually, even out of respect to the surgeon that left or the account that was lost, they stop the contact, hoping that in the future maybe the account will come back or that the waters will calm and then they can approach it again. But normally the contact is just phased out.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Is there also a function there of doctors in society have a very high social status? Surgeons amongst doctors have a very high status, be it heart, brain, orthopedic, or whatever. These are sort of very elite people. And so is there an element there that the salespeople feel intimidated by the social status of the doctor? And on one part, they feel the shame and embarrassment to lose the account. On another level, they're intimidated to go and speak to a very high status person, much better educated, much more elite than they are, to inquire as to why God, the doctor, God, has decided not to continue. So is there that element to it as well?
Absolutely. Actually, Japan is one of the markets where the surgeon is the loudest voice in the hospital. And usually, as opposed to the West, surgeons get what they want because they are accountable for the results, the clinical results. So for a sales rep to challenge the decision of a surgeon of leaving and going to another company, it's almost unthinkable.
Unthinkable to do that, yeah.
They will never do it out of the respect to the surgeon, and they will never challenge the surgeon. Even the sales director, for example, in a loss of a large university hospital, they will apologize endlessly, but they will not challenge it. That's it.
So there's no learning going on here. The trickle is there, but there's no source of the trickle indication coming through the system to you. So you're trying to get down closer to the front line to get a sense of what the salespeople, because the radar of salespeople in any organization should be pretty good, you know, what's happening, the trends, where the market's moving, what's the buzz with the competition, you know, they're getting a lot of feedback. Maybe it's hard to get that to trickle up, that's not the right word, is it? It's hard to get that to move up to the top, I suppose.
Correct.
Yeah. And were you able to get good insight from talking to the salespeople? Did that work for you?
Yes, actually, what I decided to do was go to the accounts.
Directly?
Directly.
And is that because as a foreigner, you can turn up to the surgeon and say, hey, we lost your account, why is that? And there's no hierarchy and social stigma for you as a foreigner to do that? Was that your thinking, or you didn't think like that, you just were curious to know why?
The way I approached it was I honestly wanted to understand why they left.
Okay.
And I did not stop myself from going to a lost account based on any stigma or any preconception. Basically, I just reached out to the doctors, the surgeons, and I requested an appointment to understand what their needs were and why we had not provided.
So were you able to do this in Japanese directly yourself, or did you need interpretation when you met them?
Actually, I did it in Japanese.
Directly.
But I'll tell you what I have discovered. Japanese surgeons, most of them are able to speak English,
Yeah.
and many of them enjoy speaking Italian or Spanish.
Oh, now that's intriguing.
And why is that?
Why was that? Yeah,
I will share with you.
They got all their besso in Spain and Italy or something.
Spanish pronunciation is exactly like Japanese.
Japanese, yeah.
It's exactly like the vowel sounds.
Yeah, Italian too.
Italian as well.
Yeah,
so Italian and Spanish, basically,
easy.
They learn it. It's easy. And there is an affinity specifically for Spain, the outdoors of Spain, and Italy.
Really?
Italy on the cuisine, and Spain on the food and the outdoors. And I discovered that sharing with the surgeons that I was obviously not Japanese, and I was more open and inquisitive about them, and being open. I was always questioned. I've always been asked, but tell me your background.
Oh.
So when they learn that my background is Latin, then they sometimes they will say, oh, and they will say a word in Spanish or a word in Italian.
Yeah.
Or they will go to their desk and share a picture with me of, oh, look, here I am. Oh, yeah, this is Trevi in Rome, or this is in Spain, or this is in Mexico. And they're actually happy that I recognize the spots that they're in that photo. And that kind of breaks the ice. So, yes, in Japanese, but very quickly, they switch to either English, or if they choose to stay in Japanese, then I will stay in Japanese as well.
So were you able to find out why they're trickling out?
Yes. Many of them were actually unsatisfied with the service.
Not the product.
Not the product itself, but the service. As I mentioned to you, Japanese surgeons are tinkerers. And many of them consider service. Japanese, as a culture, is very highly focused on service and very focused on the details. So, for example, sometimes a surgeon will request a sales rep to help with an instrument modification. And the companies are set up in order to help the surgeon with those specific things. But the surgeon will ask maybe once or twice, and if that doesn't happen after a couple of months, then they will get disappointed, and that's enough reason to leave.
All right.
It was not about the products or the results of the implants.
That's a bit interesting, because generally speaking, my experience of dealing with salespeople, dealing with Japanese buyers, is that they will do everything the buyer says, sometimes too much. Sometimes there's not that little bit of reflection on why are we doing this. So I'm surprised to hear that they weren't more responsive, because generally speaking, comparatively, Japanese salespeople toe the line. If the buyer wants this, then, oh, yes, we'll do it that way. Oh, yes, we'll do it that way. So I'm a bit surprised that they weren't doing that.
At that time, what we discovered was that one sales rep had too many accounts.
Oh, okay.
So it was not a matter of the sales rep not wanting to service the account.
Right.
The bandwidth was not there.
Not there. Okay. Understood. Right. And so you start to get the sense of it's really a service issue, not a product issue. It's a tinkering issue, and that means, okay, you've got too few salespeople, or you've got too many clients. So what do? Do you purge some of the clients and, the Pareto principle, find the 20 that's equivalent to the 80%, or the 4% that's equivalent to the 64%, depending how far down you want to go? Or do you just add more salespeople? What was the solution for that?
Well, we definitely did not want to purge any clients. And my mission was to grow the business.
Right.
And basically what we decided to do is to reorganize the whole Japan territory from the West Japan and the East Japan and make it a more efficient. We brought in more people as well.
Right.
So what happened is we increased the number of reps in order to service, increase the service level.
Right. So I can imagine the people who are in the company are seeing a trickle of surgeons leave. They've found no solution to it. They don't even know why, because no one's asking the question. You come in from outside, you ask the question, you get the answer. You say, hey, bingo, we're not spending enough time for these surgeons. We've got to reorganise. We've got to get more people in here. And so I can imagine that you're starting to get results. So this is giving you very, very strong credibility inside the organisation as someone from outside. And I'm sure that in that 3-year period that you were running that division, by the time you made that move from division head to CEO, that probably went pretty smoothly, I guess, because your probably internal track record was so strong and people recognised that. They said, well, yes, he should be the CEO. Is that the case or no?
Actually, interestingly enough, I set out on a project to recover the lost accounts.
Oh, okay, right.
And we launched a new flagship knee during that time. And we actually focused on going on a recovery set of actions, achieving more than 35% recovery.
Wow, that's incredible. Very good.
Instead of launching the new product to our existing accounts, we basically went to the non-customers.
Right.
But that had been accounts.
So the ex-clients, so to speak, are getting the latest and greatest. So they're made to feel special. Is that the idea? You're exclusive. We value you for your many years of client relationship. You get the goodies that are brand new out of the box. You're the first ones to get this because we value you so highly.
Exactly.
And I bet for a bunch of tinkerers and, people who are, motivated that way, that would have been like, great, we've got the latest technology ahead of everyone else. Yeah, I can see why that would have worked.
And it worked very well.
I bet it did.
In the end, that was the actual, speaking with the president at the time, my boss, he said, this was the best growth year in 10 years.
Wow. So then you become the CEO, and how was that transition?
Actually, from at that time, Zimmer actually acquired Biomet. So Biomet, the acquisition with Biomet basically brought the CEO from Biomet into Zimmer.
Okay.
Reporting to the CEO, the president of Zimmer.
Right.
So what happened is at that time, I was actually offered to move back to the U.S.
So how big was Biomet at the time?
Biomet was actually the fourth player at that time in size.
You had 70-odd people in Zimmer. How many would they have had?
About maybe 35.
Okay, so it's about half the size.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So between the marketing and the sales team.
Right.
So it was a good amount of people coming in, but the most important thing was the accounts that were coming in with the Biomet acquisition. So at that time, due to the restructure, I was offered to go back to the US and to work with the global trauma unit, the business unit. At that time, I had to make a decision. I spoke to my boss and my mentor from Switzerland that brought me to Japan, and I decided that my time in Japan and in Asia was not over.
Right.
So I made the decision to stay in Japan.
So that idea of moving you out of Japan, was that simply a face-saving exercise for the president whose company's been bought to keep them as a prominent person inside this now merged company and not have you as a more prominent person within the company? Was that the idea? We'll take him out of here and then this person will feel very comfortable and the whole merger will be more smooth? Was that the thinking?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So very simply, it was in order to, as you clearly put it, a face-saving activity so that in order to prevent sales rep attrition and account attrition coming in from the acquired company. Yes.
I can imagine, often those mergers, it's credible in Japan, the merger might have been done 30 years ago, but everybody knows. Oh, yeah. Suzuki came from the blue team and Tanaka came from the green team.
Yes.
It never, even they've merged, integrated, they recognise, even the people who came after them somehow learn who was from which team, and they know that. That's sort of it must be very hard to actually get organisations to really merge and integrate in Japan. So, okay, so you decide, well, I'm not going to play that game. I want to stay. So then, okay, what happens to the merger? How does that integration progress then?
Actually, the merger took a little bit of time. So I decided to stay, and I began looking for a different challenge within the surgery field. The merger between Zimmer and Biomed progressed, took a little bit longer, but eventually, as I understand it, they were able to merge. So they merged. Japan moved at a different speed than the rest of the world, but eventually they merged positively. Took a little bit longer.
So, and you were there through that, or?
I was there from the beginning of the merger.
Yep.
And then I was offered to go back to the States, and that's when I decided to stay, and I left the company.
Okay. So you really stepped right out of it. So, okay.
Correct.
Right. So you couldn't stay in the company and stay in Japan, so you had to step out. So where do you step out to?
So my stepping out, I spoke to my mentor at the time, my ex-boss from Zimmer at the time, and he connected me with McKinsey Consulting.
Right.
So I started doing some consulting work with McKinsey.
Here?
Here.
Okay.
In Japan. And through McKinsey, I was able to meet, through one of the packages, Intuitive Surgical, which is robotic surgery. My background coming from surgery, from general orthopedics and general surgery, enabled me to take a step into Intuitive Surgical as the senior director for commercial.
So who was the president of McKinsey at that time?
At that time in Japan, Kosuki-san, I believe it was.
All right.
Yes.
So it wasn't my son. He'd obviously moved on by then.
Correct.
Okay, right.
Correct.
Okay.
But my time in consulting actually is something that has continued, evolved. And that's an interesting thing that I've discovered as well, because through my time in Asia and Japan, I've been able to develop an affinity for, again, helping companies in this sense in order to understand the Japan market.
Right.
Companies that don't have a footprint in Japan.
Right.
And they are eager to come and break in, but they have no clue how to begin.
And they're prepared to pay a huge amount of money to McKinsey to find out. So
Correct.
Beautiful.
From the product registration to, do I go with a distributor? Do I set up shop myself? And it's an very interesting journey, tricky at times, depending on the type of company, on the type of product or service.
Also, a lot of approvals are quite difficult to get and time-consuming.
Yes.
Okay, so what if it worked in America, has it been tested in Japan? Have you got the research results from the universities here to prove what you say, blah, 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 slows everything down. So how long were you a McKinsey consultant?
I was doing consulting with McKinsey for over a year and a half.
Right, okay. And then?
And then I moved full-time into Intuitive Surgical.
With who?
Intuitive Surgical. The company.
It's called?
Intuitive Surgical.
Okay, Intersurgical.
Intuitive.
Intuitive Surgical, okay.
Intuitive Surgical.
I thought you were saying anyway, intuitive.
No. Intuitive.
Okay, great. All right.
Yes.
And then what was your role there?
My role in Intuitive Surgical was the senior marketing and commercial director.
Right.
Reporting to the president at the time.
Right.
And basically I came into Intuitive Surgical at a pivotal time where the company was trying to break the robotic surgery into the market.
Right. So this is new.
There were only a few robots in some hospitals.
Yeah.
Specifically at the time, prostatectomy and nephrectomy. Only two procedures. And the only way to grow the market, was to get more procedures approved. And my mission was to get 5 procedures approved.
Approved by who?
By PMDA
Right.
and MHLW for reimbursement.
Right.
So basically, to bring them into the mainstream, reimbursable procedures that the government or the national health system was willing to pay for. 5 procedures were the target. 12 procedures were approved.
Oh, well done.
So we exploded in sales.
Right.
And it was an amazing opportunity to penetrate the market with the highest technology available.
And what happens after that? What's the next company after that?
Sorry. Intuitive Surgical began to grow a lot in Japan. As a young company, Intuitive went through a lot of changes. A lot of changes at the higher level. So several presidents came, several presidents went, and that made it a bit difficult for the continuity of strategy because every president had a different mindset.
Yeah, that makes it tricky. How long is the period in terms of the presidency? It was sort of flipping around every 12 months or 2 years or something?
Every one of them lasted 3 months, the other one lasted maybe a year.
Yeah.
I think I had 3 presidents at that
It's
time.
a bit of a nightmare.
Yes.
It's a nightmare from the perspective of strategy. It's also a bit of a nightmare from the perspective of keeping a job. Because when you start having, the people who hire you leave and then boom, 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 suddenly, you're out of a job. So that can be tricky too.
Sure.
So what happens after intuitive surgery? Where do you go then?
After Intuitive Surgical,
Surgical, I should say, sorry.
After Intuitive, I decided to take an opportunity to lead APAC, Asia Pacific,
Okay.
with Cardinal Health.
Cardinal Health.
Cardinal Health, an American Fortune 14 company. And Cardinal Health at the time had recently acquired the medical services and patient recovery business from Medtronic.
From where?
Medtronic.
Medtronic, okay.
Medtronic. And I was familiar with the product portfolio from my time in the US. And I actually knew some of the people that were coming from the Medtronic time into Cardinal Health. And that was probably the great opportunity for me to take APAC, including Japan, head on.
So you were based here or they based you somewhere? You're based here?
Based in Japan with an office in Singapore.
Right.
So my time was divided in between being in Tokyo, but the market was not only Japan, so it was extensively broader.
Yep.
And the main APAC office was in Singapore. So the president and I were living in Japan,
Right.
and the rest everybody was living in Singapore. So we were going back and forth.
In terms of APAC, if you look at how APAC's structured, often Japan is seen as a leader, technology particularly. And so was it easier to keep a headquarters in Japan or keep yourselves in Japan and then talk about what's happening in Japan to the other markets, and they would look at that and go, oh, okay, the Japanese are doing that, we should be doing the same thing. Was that an advantage to you? Was Japan able to be leveraged like that for you to expand in the other markets?
Yes. Yes. Japan is seen throughout APAC as the reference point.
Right.
If a product works in Japan, it is normally accepted by the rest of APAC.
Right, okay.
So that in itself provided the opportunity to use Japan as a beacon for the rest of APAC.
Right.
And because Japan is at that time, and still is, ahead in the learning curve,
Yep.
and I mean the HCP in the hospitals, then the Japanese surgeons are usually proctors for the rest of APAC.
Right.
And that is something that Japanese doctors enjoy a lot.
Do they?
They like to teach.
Ah,
And they enjoy peer-to-peer activities
right.
where they can show how they tinker, how they resolve complex and simple problems, and they can benefit other surgeons that are not at the same level of the curve.
Wow, okay. So how long were you in, you never got to become the president of Cardinal, I take it.
Mm-hmm.
So then is the current company, is that Mölnlycke, is that the next step from Cardinal?
Yes.
So you pivot out of being, I guess, a division head in Cardinal to becoming the president here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so by this time you've been working in Japan for how long?
By that time, I was working in Japan for 8 years.
8 years?
8.
8 years, right? So when you turn up here, you've got strong track record in a number of companies in Japan, in basically related areas, I guess. So that's a pretty strong entry point into the company. They don't look at you like somebody from out of town who doesn't know Japan. Oh, yeah, so what, you've been working in the US, this is different. All that stuff's gone. Oops. All that stuff's taken away.
Correct.
So how did you go about engaging the team here to get behind you as the president, as a new president?
I would say if you were to go and speak to anybody in the office and ask them about the 3 things that I actually tell them consistently, they would say the same thing.
Okay.
I tell the team, and I have done this through my life in Japan consistently, 3 things. 1, keep things simple.
Mm-hmm.
Dare to think big.
Mm-hmm.
And execute at 100%.
Mm-hmm. 100% in terms of speed or quality or?
Anything you do it at your best.
Okay, I got you. Right. That's very simple goal setting and direction, isn't it?
And that simplicity
Mm-hmm.
touches people.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, it has worked very well in Japan
Mm-hmm.
because what I discovered since I came to Japan is that sometimes, you mentioned at the beginning, the decision-making process,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's too complicated, it's complex.
Yeah.
And I detected a bit of a paralysis by analysis
Mm-hmm.
in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping it simple
Mm-hmm.
actually gives them an opportunity to act simply as well.
Mm-hmm. And how big is Mölnlycke in Japan?
Mölnlycke, we have 61 people in the
So
company.
it's again getting back to the same size you're doing with before.
Yes.
So in terms of, you're in a very high-tech area and there's lots of R&D specialists inside the company, I'm sure. But for the people who work in the company, they're not in the R&D section, but still there's an opportunity for them to come up with innovation in delivery or marketing or sales or any number of areas, admin even in the company. What have you found works well to have people become innovative around their work?
The freedom to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
That is also something that I have been working a lot on, which is incentivizing people to do things differently, not to follow the sort of the status quo way of thinking or way of doing things, but also to come up with their own ideas. And that has to be synced at the same time with the ability to make decisions. And at the beginning, I can tell you, it's not easy for them because decisions are usually centralized in the Japanese business environment. And the way I've gone about it is basically opening up the microphone to everybody and stating out clearly, look at this business like you own it. To the sales rep, you own your territory. It is your business. How do you want to grow it?
Well, just let me stop you there, because the reason that decision-making is centralized in Japan is so we're all responsible, So nobody individually is responsible. So if we make a bad decision, or we lose a lot of money or whatever, no one gets fired because, it's everyone. So when you start getting into individual, it's your territory, or encourage you to innovate, take risks, take responsibility that goes with doing that. For a lot of Japanese, I'm sure that's not a choice that's particularly appealing, because their experience would have been you get punished for making mistakes. Japan is a no-defect culture, no-mistake culture, and the best way to avoid making a mistake is to do nothing new or innovative. So it's almost this counterpoint. If you're in an R&D role, that's completely different. But for the average person working in the company, there's no upside to that stuff. So how did you convince them to actually do it for real?
I'll give you an example. When I set the goals for product launches or for market penetration, I set a goal for the team, but with the director or the head of the department, I give them a range. Fall within this range. And you talk to your team and ask them to be within this range.
This is a range of money, of time, of quality?
Of a range of an achievement rate. For example, in a month period, in a 30-day period, how many new accounts are you going to get? There is a hard number. But giving them the flexibility of a range, you can...
So say, for example, you wanted 20 new accounts a month, for example. So you would say, okay, ideally 20, but we'll take a range of 15 to 25. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay, right.
Yes. That way, you will have the high achievers who will actually go beyond, and then you will have the rest, which probably the highest percentage will be in the middle. And you'll have some of the ones that faced some headwinds at the lower end, but you give them the benefit of the effort that they put in without a sense of you failed.
Right, right.
And that ends up motivating the entire team.
So other people might think, well, if I want 25, I set 25 as the minimum. So I put as much pressure as I can on everyone to achieve 25 or better. So why do you think this range of 20, 15 to 25 for you worked better than saying, okay, we're going for 25 minimum, get out there and make it happen?
Because in order to, if I were to say, and I tried it, saying 25 is the minimum and go from there up, but you cannot be below that, then several sales reps, depending on the condition, some of the markets, the sub-markets within Japan are not generating enough as the bigger cities. So, for example, you cannot expect the same productivity in a say North Hokkaido than you would in Kansai.
Yeah, totally different market. Yeah.
So what happens is, if I give them the range, then the North Hokkaido is going to feel that the playing field is a little bit more leveled. Not only the Tokyo or the Kansai or the Fukuoka or Kyoto areas, right?
Or you could go the other way. I mean, seen this too, where people say, right, North Hokkaido, your target is 5. Kansai, your target is 30. Fukuoka, your target's 25. And you could actually set the target according to the scope and capacity of that market to bear that type of productivity. You could do it that way too, but you didn't choose to do it that way? You could
do it that way, but by doing that flexible range, the result is normally above the minimal target.
Right. Okay.
And that's where the flexibility comes in, because the sales rep has in his mind, okay, I have this range, so I can challenge for this.
Right. Right.
So the carrot is there, the target is also there, and they can play within that range.
Okay.
So instead of saying, just shoot for 3 because it's North Hokkaido, no, shoot between 3 and 7. And normally they will come above the target, above the minimal expectation.
Interesting idea. What other things have you found works well in terms of getting innovation from people?
I told you about decision making. So one of the things that has worked well for me is to prompt them to speak, regardless of the setting. So, for example, I've made it a custom to make town hall meetings, and the town hall meetings include a section of Ask Mario, and I give them 10 questions, and they design the questions. They can ask anything.
When you say you give them 10 questions, what are you saying? You give them a limit of 10 questions, or you have 10 questions from which they choose? Or?
Within the town hall meeting, there's a section of maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
10 minutes within that, 10 questions within that time period.
Right. And they design the questions, that whatever is important for them, whatever is a hot topic on their mind, they can bring it up there. And they do it on a big platform.
Right.
So they choose one of them will be the speaker, or maybe a couple of them.
So they're in groups, are they? For example, what I'm getting at is, I can imagine in a town hall of 60 people plus, no one's going to put their hand up for a question in front of everyone else because they're worried. Should I be the one asking the question? Am I senior enough? Do I have enough status? If I'm a young woman, I should definitely not be asking any questions of anyone. I've been in the company long enough. You've got all this sort of repressive stuff going on, which stops questions. And then you got the problem of, what if my question, everyone thinks I'm stupid. If I ask this question, I better not let them know I'm stupid, so I won't ask the question. So you've got all this against holding people back from asking questions. So what you're saying is that by getting them into groups, the collective of that group come up with a question, so it's not one individual.
Exactly.
But the question still comes up.
Exactly. So the question is the collective result of their pain points or interests.
Right.
And they only choose the spokesperson. And usually the spokesperson is the highest.
How big a size groups do you like? You got 3, 5? I mean, how big do you like it? 10
between 7 to 10.
So they're quite big. 7 to 10 is quite a big group.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That gives them enough anonymity and enough mass.
Yes.
You get the best of both worlds. You get enough anonymity so that they can feel free, but you get enough critical mass to get substantive questions.
Okay. And what else have you found? Like that's a very, with your talk about innovation, you talk about this openness to having the questions asked Mario. What other things have you found work well for getting trust?
One of the things, a few things have worked for me. One of the first things that I've done, and I continue doing, I walk around a lot in the office, and I just talk to people. And I look very closely at the engagement survey.
Okay. How often do you do the engagement survey?
The engagement survey is normally done twice a year.
Twice a year?
Twice a year.
Wow.
Yeah. Once a year is the main, and the second time is usually like a refresher.
Right.
So,
okay. And is this a globally organized?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what has worked for me in Japan is looking at the engagement survey and then identifying pain points that I have considered hot topics or low-hanging fruit. I'll give you an example. Flexible time schedule and holidays. Japan is notoriously bad for taking holidays, personal time off.
It's notoriously good for granting holidays. Everyone's got their holidays. But when you look at the list of names who are working for you and how many days they've got left in holidays, it's enormous. And they lose them after 2 years, so it's never get taken.
Exactly. So what I have done is encourage people through personal messages to take their holidays.
So a personal message would, what are you saying? A letter? Are you sending them an email? You're phoning them up? How do you do that?
Different ways. Email, Teams message, so instant message.
So how do they take that? Because why aren't they taking their holidays? I never quite understand that myself. Being an Australian, taking the holiday seems like infinitely good idea, and we all take it, right? There's no question about that. But in Japan, they don't take it.
No.
And so, do they see that as a positive? That Mario is thinking about them, beyond just the work format. Is there some subliminal messaging going on here that I have to, disappear for a while? Are they checking up on me while I'm not around or something? How are they interpreting that?
So, the way, going back to the Ask Mario, there are actually no questions that they cannot ask. I'm very open with them, with the team. And that openness comes from the day-to-day conversations, from running into someone at the water cooler, or running into someone in the bathroom, or just saying hello in the hallway. They perceive that. I don't behave as a shacho that has a 10-foot transparent wall between myself and the rest of the team. Come in, say hello to everybody, give them a smile, ask them about their family, ask them about how they're doing. And that has generated a different reaction to my questions, to my requests. So I actually, last year, we closed the year with everybody taking their vacations for the year. No one had extra days left.
Mario, you must be the only leader in Japan to ever have achieved that. It's a phenomenal result. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I get this with people they get 20 days a year. Next thing you got 40 days, and they'll start losing 20 of those and go back to 20. You go, you got 35 days left. What the hell are you doing? Go and have a break. No, I'm not taking it. So well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations, genius.
Actually, I'll tell you what else we have done. And another thing that works very well with me is partnering with the HR head. Because the HR head and myself are very closely in lockstep to message consistently to the team. So the Obon came. So when Obon comes, yes, there are the official days, but the rest are not official.
This year it was on a weekend.
Exactly. So then what do you do? So then what we did is, we're going to close this and this day, and you're going to take these holidays. And
so
people
that's
were
interesting
actually,
because you're actually telling them when they can take their leave. When under Japanese employment law, you can't actually nominate that. They have complete choice of when they take their leave, but you could actually direct them to use up this amazing amount of surplus leave they've got, and they accepted that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, and they actually appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly. Take the
They
leave.
appreciate it.
Take the leave.
The pressure is not, they don't feel the pressure. So one of the things that I have seen is, as of why they don't take the vacation, one of the most common answers is, if I take leave, then my peer will have to do my work.
Yeah.
So I am annoying my peer.
Yeah.
But if everybody's off, then no one is pressured.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of other things that build trust, what else have you found that works well?
Another thing, when I first came to Japan, I developed a mentorship process, a mentorship program. And I began that in Zimmer. I used to do it in the States, and I did it in Switzerland as well. Basically, take two mentees and really devote time to, invest time to helping them grow, helping them flourish. And usually, the way I approach it is look at the high potential list. And from that hypo list, identify not just the top hypo, but some of the different diversity part of the team. So, for example, not two mentees that are men, but maybe one and one, or maybe even the other way around. And when I started doing that at Zimmer, my peer, the division head for the other business, said, "Hey, you know what? I actually want to do that. Can you take over one? Can I take one of yours and you take one of mine?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So what happens is, the way I developed the program is very simple. Do a monthly call, 60-minute call with the mentee, and hone in on aspirations or conflicts. For example, develop the relationship with the mentee and talk to me about things that are not really going so well for you. Whether it's in the market or whether it's at work or anything that you want. If you had a magic wand, and this is the word that I use all the time, if you had a magic wand, what would you change? You'd be surprised with the information you get. Because they tell you about the relationship within the group. They try to be very safe around what they say, but probing in a little bit, you get a lot of information. And then give them suggestions. So why don't you try, if you have poor communication is something that comes up a lot, whether it's with the direct supervisor or among the peers. So usually what I say is, okay, try to do this. For example, if you feel you have bad communication with this person, go around the other way. So ask him or her about what you can do for him. Offer something. Offer some of your time. Offer some help to introduce him to another account that you know. Or even just talk about non-work related. And they appreciate that a lot because sometimes they center too much around the work conversation.
Right.
The mentorship program works only if the mentor is vested.
So is there only one mentor? Are you the only mentor? Or other division heads here mentors as well?
No, other division heads become mentors too.
So you've got a multiple mentor system in operation. Okay.
So it becomes a little bit viral because then one department becomes jealous that they why are we not having mentorship?
Yeah, they're getting mentored. What's wrong with us? Yeah, what are you doing?
Exactly. So then it becomes a little bit viral.
Interesting.
And that works well because then the mentees, they feel included.
Good.
And they feel that they're getting airtime with the leadership.
Yeah.
And that motivates them a lot. It generates innovation. It generates employment satisfaction as well.
So if we think about, if we were talking about culture build, you've had a lot of different experiences with different companies over the years. You've worked in multiple territories, throughout the world. You've accumulated a lot of insight. In terms of building a culture inside the company, what things have you found have worked well for you to build a culture? Often you'll have a global culture, then you can have a national culture, or even an office culture, or even a section culture. So there's always going to be, under the umbrella, you have the central umbrella, but there'll be local variations on that. What have you found in terms of building a culture for Japan, for this company, in Japan, even though it's part of a global organization, that work well?
What I have found that works is we succeed or we fail together.
Right.
And that is actually powerful because many times what you will find, what I have seen as well, is people say, oh, but I'm working or we are working more than other areas, or that other area can still help us a little more. And what I always say is, your success or their success, the result is for everyone. So at some point, for example, during the COVID, I'll give you that example, during the COVID time, the peak of COVID in Japan, our logistics and customer service team was working overdrive. we had several COVID cases in the office, and we had to close the office down and allow people to work remotely. But the supply chain team and customer service had to come to the office because of the setup, because of the customer orders to service them. So at that time, the customer service team and the supply chain team, even though they were working overtime, they understood that the result from the sales team was also going to be benefiting everybody.
Right.
Speaking about that in the town hall and recognizing the back office successes is very important. Because in Japan, normally, and that becomes part of the culture,
Right.
which is everybody is doing something for the collective success,
Right.
even if you don't see it. So what I do, for example, is at the town hall meetings and the kickoff meeting or mid-year meeting, the recognition is not only focused on the commercial, but on the support functions. This way, for example, the back office understands that their work is important and recognized. The President's Award is equivalent to the best sales rep because it's an opportunity for anybody in the company, not only commercial, to be fully recognized for their extraordinary work. Last year, it went to supply chain and customer service. So taking the opportunity to highlight or showcase the support functions that make the business go forward as well lets everybody know that the focus is not only on commercial.
If we're going to give some advice to someone who is going to be sent to Japan, they don't speak Japanese, they've never worked in Japan, they don't know Japan, what would be some advice you'd give them?
The first advice that I would say is be ready to be yourself. Don't try to be Japanese. And regardless of your Japanese level, for example, if it's a person who doesn't speak Japanese, try to learn a bit, but don't give up on speaking openly in your language, in English, for example. Probably all Japanese can understand, read and write English. Speaking is a problem, pronunciation is a problem, grammatically speaking also a problem. But what I would suggest, especially for someone who's going to be sent, it's probably going to be a leadership position or a divisional head, bring an open mind to Japan. Be ready to be flexible, but bring your essence and your sense of urgency. That is something that Japanese appreciate. And the open communication. I would also stress another thing. Don't mind repeating things. Sometimes in the West, people are a little bit impatient and they'll say one thing very fast and I already said that. No. Say it twice, say it thrice. And be flexible. Japan is one of the few markets in the world where an investment will give you extremely high profitability. It's hard to break into the market, but once you break in, it is so stable that you will recover the investment with good profit. But any foreigner that comes, and that would probably be another thing that I would advise, be patient with the Japanese because they are very patient. And if we look at it from a foreigner's shoes or from a foreigner perspective, they have more time than we do.
Yeah.
And they're willing to play the card.
Yeah.
And the way to connect with them is through open speaking, get into the trenches. Get out of the office, get out of your seat, and get into the trenches. The more you are part of the team in the trenches, the more they will accept your advice, and they will see you as part of the team.
If you're going to give a definition of leadership, what would your definition of leadership be?
My definition of leadership is a leader must be ready to serve his team. And that's how I see myself. I am here for the benefit of the team, to support the team, to break down barriers, to make sure that they get what they need in order to perform. A leader needs to be the voice of his people. And in order to be consistently the voice of the team, he needs to be connected to them and needs to be ready to serve them. Leadership is basically adopting a group of people for a purpose, a collective purpose, and serving as a steward in the right direction. But always serving the team.
Okay, thank you. Well, Mario, it's been great to go through your career with you and hear your insights and ideas about leading in Japan. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Craig. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
And so, join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.